I read this story. Every page, every heartbreak, every death. The villain Omega dies alone on the last page, unmated, unmourned, and forgotten by the three men he destroyed his own life trying to claim. The only problem? I am him now. The ceiling of the Ashford Pack dormitory in Salt Lake City was white and aggressively ordinary for a place that was about to ruin my life. I blinked at it for a full 30 seconds, cataloging everything I knew. Hey, welcome back. Or welcome for the very first time. You've just stumbled into the best corner of the internet for Omegaverse BL audio stories. We're talking drama, slow burn, sassy omegas, and endings that are earned. Hit subscribe, get comfortable, and let's get into it. My name in this body was Roman Voss, 22 years old. Omega, designated villain of a BL Omegaverse web novel I had binged at 2 in the morning 3 weeks before a delivery truck introduced itself to my face at high speed on a New Jersey crosswalk. Somewhere between the impact and waking up here, the universe apparently decided I had not suffered enough. Roman Voss, the obsessive, manipulative, scene-chewing antagonist who spent approximately 400 pages making life miserable for 3 alpha leads before getting unceremoniously written off in chapter 32 by his own scheming. I remembered reading that chapter. I remembered thinking, well, he earned that. I did not think I would become him. I sat up slowly, checking the damage. His body, my body now, was lean and sharp-boned, with dark circles under his eyes from whatever emotional spiral the original Roman had been mid-stride through before I crash-landed into his skull. The room around me was a private dorm suite at the University of Salt Lake, aggressively neat in the way of someone who controlled his environment because he could not control anything else. On the desk sat a ceramic coffee mug. I reached for it without thinking because I needed something to do with my hands, and the second my fingers wrapped around it, the psychometry hit. That was new. It crashed through me like cold water, a flash of memory that was not mine. Roman standing at that same desk, shaking, staring at his phone. A text message on the screen that read, "Don't contact us again." 3 red receipts. 0 replies. The grief attached to that moment was so dense and so raw it punched the breath straight out of me. I dropped the mug. Right? Psychometry. The ability to read the emotional history of objects through touch. Something the original Roman absolutely did not have, which meant this power was mine alone. A parting gift from whatever cosmic entity thought my situation needed to be more complicated. Fantastic, I said out loud to no one. I get to feel everyone's trauma in addition to my own. Great. Love that for me. I stood, crossed to the window, and looked out at the main quad 4 stories below. And there they were. Reid Ashford walked like the ground had a personal obligation to hold still for him. Tall, broad-shouldered, jaw set in that particular way that said he had never second-guessed a single decision in his life. He was exactly as cold in person as he had been on the page, the kind of handsome that felt less like an invitation and more like a caution sign. Beside him, Callum Drake was saying something that Reid was not acknowledging, because Reid Ashford acknowledged nothing that did not directly threaten his pack. Callum was quieter in presence but not in danger, dark-eyed and watchful. The type who never raised his voice because he never needed to. Walking slightly behind them both, Lennox Caine had his hands in his jacket pockets and his gaze already tilted up toward my window. My stomach dropped. In the novel, Lennox was the one who found Roman's body. He stared up at me for exactly 3 seconds, no expression, no recognition, just that flat and measuring look that meant he had already filed me under problem and moved on. Then he looked away. I pressed my back against the wall and breathed. Okay. I was trapped in the body of the most universally despised character in a story I had read purely for entertainment. I had accidentally inherited a superpower that made touching objects an emotional liability. And the 3 men I was canonically supposed to destroy and be destroyed by were living 30 feet below me. The original Roman had no idea how this story ended. I did. Which meant I had exactly one advantage in this disaster. I intended to use every bit of it, starting with not dying in the first week. That required a plan. Specifically, it required me to stop behaving like the original Roman, whose entire personality could be summarized as emotionally unhinged with commitment issues and a talent for making everything worse. In the novel, Roman's first move was to corner Reid Ashford in the quad and make a scene spectacular enough to get himself banned from 2-pack events and a study hall. I was not doing that. I grabbed a jacket from the closet, something dark and simple, pulled it on, and walked out the door before I could talk myself into staying in bed and catastrophizing professionally. The stairwell smelled like concrete and someone's forgotten energy drink. I kept my hands in my pockets as I descended, which was a survival strategy one was already developing for the psychometry. Touching things was now a calculated risk. Handrails were emotional minefields. I was learning. The quad was busy in that early afternoon way where everyone looked purposeful but nobody was actually going anywhere. I stepped outside and the September air hit me. Crisp and thin the way Salt Lake City air always carried that particular high-altitude edge. I made it approximately 14 steps before I walked directly into Callum Drake. Not metaphorically, physically. Shoulder to chest, full contact, the kind of collision that knocked my breath sideways and sent the folder he was carrying straight to the ground. Papers everywhere. Sorry, I said automatically, and crouched to help gather them before my brain caught up with my body and reminded me who I was crouching in front of. My fingers grazed the edge of one of the papers. The psychometry detonated. A flash, sharp and involuntary. Callum sitting alone in a room that felt too large, staring at a framed photograph he refused to put away. Grief like standing water, the kind that does not move or drain. Something lost. Someone gone. Then it cut out as fast as it came. I blinked hard and stacked the papers without touching them directly again. Callum crouched across from me. Up close he was more human than the novel made him feel. A slight tension around his eyes that the narrative had described as coldness but looked more like exhaustion in person. "You're Roman Voss," he said. "Not a question." "Guilty," I said. "Also sorry about the papers. My spatial awareness is a work in progress." Something flickered across his face. Not quite amusement. More like confusion at having expected something different. He took the folder from me, stood, and I stood with him. "You're in Morrison Hall?" he asked. "4th floor." "Yes. We're on the 3rd. He said it like a warning, or maybe just information. With Callum Drake, the novel had not always made the distinction clear. "Great," I said pleasantly. "Neighbors. Love that. Very normal and not at all complicated." He stared at me for a beat too long. Then Reid Ashford materialized at Callum's shoulder the way cold fronts materialize, sudden and total, and the temperature of the entire conversation dropped 4 degrees. Reid looked at me the way people look at problems they have already decided how to handle. His scent hit me a second later, cedar and something sharper underneath, and my omega biology did something deeply unhelpful and interested that I chose to aggressively ignore. "Voss," he said. "Ashford," I said back with the exact same energy. His eyes narrowed slightly. In the novel, this was the part where Roman started crying and making demands. I smiled instead, calm and unbothered, because I had read his entire character arc, and I knew exactly which specific fears lived behind that immovable expression. I was not going to use that information to hurt him, but I was absolutely going to use it to survive him. "Nice to meet you," I said, meaning none of it and all of it simultaneously. Again, I walked away first. Behind me, I heard nothing. No footsteps, no voices. Just silence, which in Omegaverse storytelling meant I had just done something neither of them expected. Good. Unexpected was the only card I had. I planned to play it slowly, which lasted exactly 45 minutes before the universe decided to stress test that resolve. The campus library at the University of Salt Lake was all warm wood paneling and tall windows that made everyone inside look like they belonged in a movie about smart, emotionally unavailable people. I found a corner table, dropped my bag, and pulled out the notebook I had located in Roman's desk drawer this morning. His handwriting was sharp and slightly aggressive, which tracked. I needed to reconstruct everything I remembered about the story before the details faded. Names, timelines, which twist happened in which chapter, and most critically, the exact sequence of events that led to Roman's death in chapter 32. I wrote fast, keeping my handwriting small enough that nobody passing by could read it. Chapter 7. Reid finds out Roman bribed a pack elder. Confrontation at the East Field. Roman lies badly. Reid stops trusting him entirely. Chapter 12. Callum catches Roman going through his private correspondence. This one is bad. Callum does not forgive easily and does not forget at all. Chapter 19. Lennox. The warehouse incident. Do not let this happen. I underlined that last one 3 times. In the novel, the warehouse incident was the moment Roman crossed a line so clean and so irreversible that even readers who had felt sorry for him stopped. I remembered the comment section under that chapter. It was not kind. I was not going to let it happen. Simple as that. "You're taking notes in a library," said a voice behind me. Groundbreaking. I turned around. Lennox Caine was standing at the end of my table with 2 coffees, one of which he set down in front of me without asking if I wanted it, the way someone does when offering is not really a question they intend to let you answer. I looked at the coffee. I looked at him. He was leaning against the shelf with his hands back in his pockets now, watching me with that same flat expression from the window this morning, except up close it was less flat and more carefully managed. In the novel, Lennox was described as the quiet one, the one who noticed everything and said nothing until what he said mattered. Readers loved him for exactly that, right up until the warehouse chapter where he became something else entirely. I knew what he was capable of. I also knew he did not know that I knew. "You followed me," I said. "I was already here," he said. "And the coffee? You looked like you needed it." I picked it up carefully by the sleeve, avoiding direct skin contact with the cup because I absolutely could not afford another involuntary psychometry episode in a public location. It was warm and smelled like dark roast, and I was genuinely grateful despite everything. "Thank you," I said, and meant it plainly enough that he looked briefly uncertain, like he had prepared for a different response. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, which I had not invited but also had not expected to stop. Lennox did things with a quiet confidence that made objection feel like the stranger choice. "Reid told me about the quad," he said. "Reid tells you things. Reid tells me everything he considers a threat assessment." I raised an eyebrow. "He considers me a threat assessment." Lennox looked at me steadily. "You walked away from him first." I was finished with the conversation. Nobody walks away from Reid first. "I did," I said simply. "It wasn't complicated. I just turned around and moved my legs." The corner of his mouth shifted. It was not quite a smile. It was the thing that lived in the same neighborhood as a smile but maintained plausible deniability. I felt something in my chest respond to it that I immediately shut down with extreme prejudice. No, absolutely not. I knew how this man's arc ended. I knew the specific kind of damage he was capable of, and I knew it looked exactly like this: quiet, attentive, dangerously easy to trust. I flipped my notebook shut before he could read anything on the page. His eyes tracked the motion. "What are you writing?" "Notes," I said. "For a project." "What kind of project?" "The kind that's none of your business, Caine." He leaned forward slightly, just enough that his scent reached me properly for the first time. Something cool and clean underneath, like rain that hadn't fallen yet. My omega senses clocked it with an enthusiasm I found personally offensive. "You're different," he said quietly. Not an accusation. More like a fact he was still deciding what to do with. I met his eyes directly and kept my voice steady. "People change." He held my gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he picked up his own coffee, leaned back, and said nothing else. We sat in silence for the next 20 minutes. Him reading. Me pretending to read while actually running probability calculations about every single way this act could go sideways. It did not go sideways, which in this story meant it was about to. The fire alarm went off at exactly 4:17 in the afternoon. Not a drill. I knew it was not a drill because the sprinkler system in the east wing of Morrison Hall activated 30 seconds later, and the sound of water hitting carpet and furniture and approximately 100 panicked students was genuinely cinematic in the worst possible way. I was on the 3rd floor landing when it happened, heading back to my room with my notebook tucked under my arm, and the sudden waterfall from the ceiling soaked me so completely and so fast that for a moment I just stood there, blinking, processing the sheer commitment of the situation. "Move," someone said behind me, firm and immediate, and a hand closed around my wrist and pulled. The psychometry slammed into me like a door to the face. Not from the hand itself, but from the wristband the hand was wearing, old leather, the kind that had been worn so long it held years of emotional residue. What hit me was not a single memory but a feeling, dense and layered. Loneliness that had been mistaken for independence for so long it had started to believe its own cover story. A choice made once that could not be unmade. Something that felt like grief wearing the mask of discipline. I knew who it belonged to before I looked up. Reid Ashford was pulling me down the stairwell with the focused efficiency of someone who made emergency decisions the way other people breathed. His jaw was set. His grip was not rough, but it was absolute. I got my legs working properly and matched his pace. "I can walk," I said. "You were standing still under a sprinkler." "I was processing." "Process outside," he said, and pushed through the emergency exit into the pale afternoon air. The quad was filling up with displaced students, wet and irritated, dragging laptops and half-eaten snacks, and the specific wounded dignity of people whose afternoon had been structurally disrespected. Campus security was already moving, directing everyone toward the covered pavilion at the south end. Reid let go of my wrist the moment we were clear of the door. I felt the absence of contact more than I expected to, which was annoying. Callum appeared out of the crowd 30 seconds later, dry because he had apparently been outside already, and took in the state of me with an expression that cycled through several things before settling on neutral. "Sprinklers got you," he said. "Observant," I said. "You should be a detective." His mouth pressed together in a way that was definitely not amusement. Lennox materialized on my other side, also dry, also insufferably composed, and looked at the state of my soaked jacket with something that might have been sympathy in someone else. So there I was, standing in the middle of the Morrison Hall evacuation, soaking wet, flanked by the three men whose story arcs I had read in their entirety, each of whom had multiple reasons to distrust me based on a version of myself I had no memory of actually being. "Perfect. The East Wing is going to be closed for at least 3 hours, Reid said, not to me specifically but to the general air. Maintenance confirmed a pressure fault in the sprinkler line. "So where do we go?" Callum said. "The common room in Hargrove Building is open," Lennox said. "Pack coordinator already sent the message." They started moving. I stood still for exactly 1 second, weighing my options. Going back to a soaking wet room was not an option. Following the three main characters of a novel I was trying desperately to redirect felt like walking voluntarily toward the plot. Then again, I already knew where standing still under sprinklers got me. I followed. The Hargrove common room was warm and slightly overcrowded. All low sofas and communal tables and the ambient noise of too many people rerouting their afternoons. Someone had started a coffee station near the window. I went straight for it because I was cold and damp and my dignity had already taken enough losses for one day. I poured a cup, wrapped both hands around it, and immediately got a flash from the ceramic handle. Some sophomore's exam anxiety from 3 days ago, vivid and sour. I released it fast. I really needed to get better at this. "You do that a lot," said a voice beside me. Lennox. Of course, Lennox. He had a talent for appearing in my peripheral vision with the quiet reliability of a weather system. "Do what?" I said. "Grab something and then let go like it burned you." I looked at him sideways. "Maybe things keep burning me." He was quiet for a moment. Across the room, Reid had claimed a corner table and was already on his phone, managing something with the focused energy of a person who could not tolerate unproductive time. Callum was near the window, watching the campus outside with that particular stillness of his that looked like calm but read, to me now, as something more guarded. "Why are you being different?" Lennox said. Not accusatory, just direct. "Different from what?" I said. "From before." I took a slow sip of coffee, buying time, choosing words. "Maybe before wasn't working," I said finally. He turned to look at me properly then, and the weight of it was significant. Lennox Caine's full attention was not a light thing. It had a texture to it, careful and measuring, like he was listening to something underneath the words. "No," he said quietly. "It wasn't." Something about the way he said it landed differently than I expected. Not like a judgment, more like a fact he had been carrying alone and was only now setting down somewhere visible. I did not know what to do with that, so I looked back at my coffee and said nothing. The warmth of the room settled around us, and the rain started outside the windows, soft and gray against the Salt Lake afternoon, and for exactly one fragile minute nothing was complicated. I knew better than to trust it, but I stayed anyway, which was how I ended up sitting 3 feet from Callum Drake while the rain pressed against the Hargrove windows and the common room slowly thinned out around us. Lennox had drifted to the far end of the room to take a phone call. Reid was still at his corner table, jaw tight, typing something that clearly irritated him. Callum had not moved from the window seat, and I had not moved from the coffee station, and somehow the distance between us had quietly become a conversation. He spoke first. "You didn't take the Alderton internship," he said. I had absolutely no idea what the Alderton internship was. Roman presumably did. I kept my expression neutral and said, "No. You fought Reid for 3 weeks to get that referral. People change their minds," I said carefully. Callum turned from the window and looked at me directly. His eyes were dark and unhurried, the kind that made you feel like he was reading a version of you that you had not finished writing yet. "Roman Voss does not change his mind," he said. "He changes tactics." Fair point, honestly. I set my coffee down and crossed my arms. Not defensively, just thoughtfully. What if I told you the tactics weren't working and I was tired? Something shifted in his expression. Small. Significant. "I'd say that's the most honest thing you've said to me in 8 months, he said. 8 months. So the original Roman had been in their orbit for 8 months before I arrived. 8 months of whatever behavior had earned him the reputation I was currently inheriting. I filed that away and kept my face calm. "Then consider it a new record," I said. Callum studied me for another beat, then looked back out at the rain. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, less interrogation and more something else. "My younger brother presented as Omega last spring," he said. "Pack registry flagged him inside a week. My father wanted to send him to a designation management program in Phoenix." I stayed very still. In the novel, this was never mentioned. Not once across 32 chapters. This was not a plot point I had read. This was something real bleeding through the edges of a story I thought I knew completely. "What did you do?" I said. "I got him out of it," Callum said simply. "Used every favor I had. Reid helped. Lennox drove 4 hours to pick him up personally." He paused. "I'm telling you this because you touched his acceptance letter last week when you came into my room uninvited, and you haven't used it against me yet." My stomach dropped straight through the floor. The original Roman had known. He had been sitting on that information, holding it like a card to play, and I had waltzed into this body with zero knowledge of any of it. "I'm not going to use it," I said quietly. "I wasn't going to. I'm not." Callum looked at me with the specific expression of someone who had been lied to cleanly enough times that they had stopped flinching at it, but had also stopped believing easily. "Why?" he said, and there it was, the question with no safe answer. I could not say because I know how this story ends and you deserved better than what Roman was going to do to you. I could not say because I read your character arc and the grief I felt off that photograph in your memory nearly took me out at the knees. So I said the truest thing I actually had. "Because it would be cruel," I said. "And I'm done being that." The rain outside got heavier. Somewhere across the room, Reid's chair scraped back from the table. Lennox's voice on his phone dropped to something too low to hear. Callum turned back to the window without another word. But he did not move away. And in the language of people who had learned to protect themselves by staying quiet, that was louder than anything he could have said. I absorbed that quietly and turned back to the coffee station to pour a second cup I did not need, just to give my hands something responsible to do. That was when Reid appeared at my elbow. Not dramatically, not with any particular announcement. He simply moved into the space beside me the way tide moves into shore, like it had always planned to be there, and was mildly annoyed the shore looked surprised. "The East Wing will reopen in 40 minutes, he said. "Thank you for that weather update," I said. He looked at me sideways. "You're in a better mood than usual." I had coffee. It changes lives. Something moved through his expression that was not quite amusement but lived in the same county. He reached past me for a cup and his arm crossed close enough to mine that his scent hit me again. Cedar and that sharp clean underneath, and my Omega biology staged another enthusiastic protest that I firmly denied representation. He poured his coffee. He did not move away. "Callum talked to you," he said. Not a question. "Callum talked near me," I said. "There's a difference." Reid turned the cup slowly in his hands, not drinking yet. I had the distinct impression he was deciding something, running calculations behind those steady eyes, measuring variables and outcomes the way he approached everything. "Why haven't you pushed back on the East Hall assignment?" he said. "You requested a territory-facing room 6 weeks ago. It was denied. The original you filed a formal complaint and CC'd the PAC board." The original me. I almost laughed. "The room I have is fine," I said. "It faces the parking structure. I like parking structures. Very honest architecture. No pretense." Reid stared at me with the energy of a man whose patience was structural rather than emotional, the kind that did not run out so much as it quietly rerouted. "You are genuinely strange," he said. "You have no idea," I said pleasantly. He almost smiled. I caught the edge of it before it disappeared, just a fraction of a degree of softening around his mouth, and the effect was frankly unfair. I looked back at my coffee immediately. The room had thinned to maybe a dozen people now, quiet conversations and the sound of rain still steady against the glass. Lennox had finished his call and was sitting on the far sofa, long legs stretched out, watching the ceiling with an expression I could not read from here. "The warehouse on 5th, Reid said suddenly, his voice lower. "Are you still involved with Hargrove's off-book operation?" Every cell in my body went still. The warehouse incident. Chapter 19. I had written "Do not let this happen" and underlined it 3 times in my notebook this morning. And here it was, walking directly up to me in real time because of course it was. "No," I said carefully. "I'm not." Reid searched my face with the focused attention of someone who had been lied to before and had since developed a finely calibrated detector for it. "Roman," he said, and the weight he put on that name was complicated. Not hostile, almost tired. "I'm not involved," I said again, steadier this time. "And I'm not going to be. Whatever was being planned, I'm out of it." The silence between us stretched long enough to have texture. Then Reid did something I was not prepared for. He exhaled slowly, set his coffee cup down and said quietly, "Good," just that. One word. But the relief underneath it was real and unguarded, and it lasted exactly 1 second before he folded it back behind his composure like he had never let it out at all. It wrecked me a little, because in the novel, Reid Ashford never showed relief. He showed command and cold judgment and the occasional devastating competence. He did not show relief. This version was going to be so much harder to stay detached from. I gripped my cup carefully and said nothing, but something between us had shifted, quiet and fragile and real, like the first crack of light under a door that had been shut for a long time. I was still thinking about that when I realized my notebook was not in my bag. I checked twice, unzipped every pocket, turned the bag upside down, went through the motions of someone hoping the laws of physics had quietly made an exception. They had not. The notebook was gone, which meant I had left it on the library table during the fire alarm evacuation when Lennox had materialized with coffee and dismantled my concentration entirely. I crossed the common room fast, heading back toward the library. I was too late by about 4 minutes. Lennox was standing near the Hargrove entrance with my notebook open in his hands. He was not reading it casually. He was reading it the way you read something that has changed the shape of the room around you, still and focused and very, very quiet. My stomach became a problem. I walked toward him anyway because running would have been both undignified and pointless. He looked up when I was 6 feet away. The expression on his face was something I had never seen on him before. Not in this building, not through any emotional residue I had accidentally absorbed. It was not anger. It was worse than anger. It was the specific look of someone who had just understood something they wished they hadn't. "Lennox," I said carefully. He turned to a page near the front and read aloud, voice flat and precise. Chapter 12. Callum catches Roman going through his private correspondence. This one is bad. He turned another page. Chapter 19. Lennox. The warehouse incident. Do not let this happen. He looked up. 3 underlines. The silence was catastrophic. It's not what it looks like, I said, which was the single most useless sentence in the English language, and I knew it the moment it left my mouth. It looks like you've been running a script, Lennox said. It looks like you knew about Callum's brother. It looks like you knew about the warehouse before Reid mentioned it tonight. It looks like every single thing you've done since this morning has been calculated from a list you wrote before any of it happened. That's not, I started. Reid told you about the warehouse and you already knew, he said. You didn't flinch. You didn't ask what operation. You said you were out of it, clean and fast, like someone reading a prepared answer. Every word landed accurately. That was the worst part. He was not wrong about a single observation. He was just wrong about what it meant. I can explain this, I said. Can you? His voice was not raised. That was the thing about Lennox that the novel had gotten exactly right. He was most dangerous when he was quietest. Because from here it looks like the new version of you is just a better rehearsed version of the same thing. That one cut. I felt it in a place I had not expected to feel anything, which told me more about how much ground I had lost in the last few hours than I was comfortable admitting. You think I'm performing, I said. I think you came in here with information you shouldn't have and built something that looked like change. He closed the notebook. And I think I almost believed it. Lennox. He held the notebook out to me. I took it. Our fingers did not touch. He made sure of that. And the deliberateness of it was its own sentence. Stay away from the warehouse, he said. Stay away from whatever Hargrove is running. And stay away from Callum. He walked past me without another word. I stood in the Hargrove entrance holding my notebook while the rain outside continued its complete indifference to my situation. And something in my chest pulled tight with a frustration that was half fury and half something more honest that I refused to name. I had been so careful. I had changed every move, every word, every instinct the original Roman would have followed. And it still was not enough. Because the problem was not just what I did. It was what Roman had already done before I got here. I stood there long enough that the rain outside shifted from heavy to steady, and then I made myself move because standing still had already cost me once today and I was not making it a habit. I found an empty bench in the covered walkway between Hargrove and the East Hall, sat down, and opened the notebook to the first page. I needed to think clearly. No psychometry, no scent confusion, no alpha proximity scrambling my focus. Just the facts. Fact 1. Lennox had read enough to believe I was running a manipulation script. From the outside, with no context, that was a completely reasonable conclusion. The notes looked exactly like what he said they looked like. Fact 2. I could not tell him the truth. I reincarnated into this body from another universe after getting hit by a delivery truck, and I read your entire storyline in a web novel, was not a sentence that ended with anyone believing me. It was a sentence that ended with a wellness check and a very uncomfortable conversation. Fact 3. The warehouse incident in Chapter 19 happened because Roman had been feeding information to someone named Hargrove, and when that arrangement went wrong, Lennox got caught in the middle of it. That was the line Roman crossed. That was the one that made readers stop feeling sorry for him. I had not done any of that, but I was sitting on the evidence of knowing about it in advance, which from the outside looked identical. I pressed my thumb against the cover of the notebook without thinking. The psychometry came in slow this time, quieter than usual, like a tide instead of a wave. Roman sitting on this same bench, I recognized the covered walkway, pressing his own thumb to this same cover. The emotion attached to it was not scheming or calculation. It was exhaustion, a specific kind that comes from wanting something so badly for so long that the wanting itself has worn you down to the bone. He had been tired. The original Roman had been genuinely, deeply tired. That reframed something in me that I had not expected to need reframing. I closed the notebook and looked out at the rain. The thing was, I had a choice that Roman never had. I knew the ending. I knew exactly which decisions led to Chapter 32 and exactly which ones did not. I could walk the other direction at every fork with full information. But knowing the map did not mean the road was clear. Because Lennox's face when he read those pages was real. Callum's careful quiet by the window was real. Reid's single unguarded exhale was real. These were not fictional people reacting to a plot. They were actual people carrying actual damage, and the person they associated my face with had contributed to that damage in ways I was only beginning to understand. I could not just perform differently. I had to be accountable for a history I had not lived. I stood up, tucked the notebook into my bag, and walked back toward Hargrove. Lennox was still in the entrance hallway, leaning against the wall with his phone in his hand, not using it, waiting or thinking or both. He looked up when I came through the door. I stopped 3 feet from him and said, "You're right that the notes look bad. I'm not going to argue that." He said nothing. "But I need you to consider one alternative explanation," I said. "Not because I expect you to believe it immediately, just because I'm asking you to hold space for the possibility that something changed and it's real, even if you can't verify it yet." Lennox looked at me with that careful, measuring attention of his. "Why does it matter to you whether I believe it?" he said. It was a genuine question, not hostile, the kind of question that deserved a genuine answer. "Because you drove 4 hours to pick up Callum's brother from a program designed to make him feel like he was wrong for existing," I said quietly. "And someone who does that deserves better than another round of being handled." The hallway was very still. Something moved through Lennox's expression, slow and significant, like weather changing over a long, flat landscape. He did not say he believed me, but he did not walk away either. And right now, in this specific story, that was everything. Lennox pushed off the wall slowly. He looked at me for a long moment, the kind that had weight and intention behind it. Then he said, "Come with me," not a command, an invitation with a straight spine. I followed him back into the common room where Reid and Callum were still stationed at opposite ends like twin weather systems that had not yet decided whether to collide. They both looked up when we walked in. Reid's eyes moved from Lennox to me and back. Callum went very still. Lennox crossed the room, took the notebook from my bag without asking, and set it open on the table in front of Reid. "Read it," he said. Reid looked at it. Then he read. Callum came closer and read over his shoulder, and the silence in that corner of the room became a living thing with texture and heat. I stood and let them read because there was nothing else to do. This was the moment. Either it landed or it did not. Reid looked up first. "Chapter 7, he said. "You wrote that Roman bribed a pack elder. Past tense. You wrote it like something that already happened." "It did already happen," I said. "Just not to me." Callum's eyes lifted from the page. "What does that mean?" I took a breath. Then I told them the truth. All of it. The web novel, the crosswalk in New Jersey, waking up in Roman's body with Roman's history and Roman's reputation and none of Roman's memories. The psychometry arriving unannounced like an extremely inconvenient housewarming gift. Every move I had made today being an attempt to undo an ending I had read and refused to accept. I told them clearly, without drama, the way you tell a truth when you have stopped caring whether it sounds believable and started caring only that it is honest. When I finished, the room was quiet enough to hear the rain thinning outside. Then Callum said, "That is the most unhinged thing anyone has ever said to me." "I know," I said, "and you're expecting us to believe it." "I'm expecting you to make your own call," I said. "I just needed to stop carrying it alone." Reid closed the notebook with a careful hand. He looked at me with that steady, unreadable expression, except I was starting to understand that unreadable was not the same as empty. There was something moving behind it, slow and deliberate, the way he processed everything. "The warehouse," he said. "You knew about Hargrove before I said his name tonight." "Chapter 19, I said. "I underlined it 3 times. Because you were trying to stop it. Because Lennox gets hurt in that chapter," I said. "And I wasn't going to let that happen." The silence this time was different, softer at the edges. Lennox looked at me from across the table with an expression I had not seen on him in any version of this story. Something open and a little undone, like a door that had been locked so long the person inside had forgotten there was a handle. "You rewrote yourself," he said quietly. For people you had never actually met. I rewrote myself because the original ending was wrong, I said. And because you deserved better. All three of you. Reid stood up from the table. He crossed the distance between us in 4 steps and stopped close enough that his scent wrapped around me completely, cedar and that sharp clean underneath, and my entire Omega biology finally stopped fighting it and just exhaled. He reached out and tucked the notebook back into my bag with a deliberateness that felt like a decision. Stay, he said. One word. The same weight as a promise. Callum came to stand beside him, quieter but present. His shoulder close enough to mine that I felt the warmth of it. And Lennox moved to my other side, hands out of his pockets for once, and the three of them around me felt less like a closing in and more like something I had not had in either life. Something that held. I looked at the three of them, these complicated, flawed, entirely real people who had every reason to turn me away and had chosen differently. I had read their story from the outside once. I had no idea how this new version ended. For the first time since waking up in the wrong body in the right disaster, I found that I did not need to.